Next, I would like to introduce Scott Askin from Novartis.
So thank you, Christina. I hate following really good speakers. My name's Scott Askin. I'm a Portfolio Innovation Director with Novartis, just across the river. The usual disclaimer. And this is my agenda for today. I wanted to talk about challenges in innovation. We've heard a lot this morning that I will probably reiterate, so it's nice to see that there's a lot of common themes. The need for change, how our operating model within global clinical operations has changed over the last few years, how we now scale innovation, or we attempt to scale innovation, how we measure success, and then a few final thoughts to leave you with. So I wanted to be the annoying person that got some audience participation. So we heard already some challenges, but maybe just shout out, what is the biggest challenge that you've experienced when implementing novel innovations? Anybody? Just shout, you don't need a microphone.
Cost.
Yep.
Adoption.
Others? Louder? Okay. So I didn't want to kind of belabor the point, but we've heard a lot about these things this morning, especially on the panel this morning around the regulatory landscape. I think that's really kind of changed a lot over the last few years. It's certainly evolved. We now have a lot of regulation that helps us with innovation. But I really wanted to focus on those last 4 items because I think these are the areas that, from an operational perspective, we can really have some impact. So why have we experienced so many challenges? So within Novartis, we've had a fragmented innovation landscape. Often we started out with a nice new shiny toy, and we tried to find a team that we could convince to try and use that innovation. And then we would try and show some value or demonstrate some value. And we did it trial by trial. There's also a proliferation of different frameworks. So again, we're a big company. We had many people working on innovation, often working similar projects. Really, if we'd have worked together, we could potentially have had more success. And there's no systematic planning for innovation. So again, team by team, trying to iterate, trying to improve and show value, whereas maybe working together would have solved some of the problems that we've seen. So there was a need for change. And this is where the introduction of the Global Clinical Operations Innovation Team came from. So a couple of years ago, Novartis had a huge shift in how clinical operations was operating, and the innovation team was one team that was formed out of that. And our purpose was really to drive sustainable innovation. So we're not thinking about green trials here, we're thinking about how we take innovation, move from those pilots after pilot after pilot, and really create a framework that helps us build and increase the use of innovation, but also show the value and show benefit to our clinical trials. But most importantly, we prioritize the patient and site experience. So how did we do this? We refocused how we foster innovation. So I was trying to show that we turn the thing upside down. So we move from looking at solutions that, or technologies that maybe help with, we try and find a problem to fix, to really focusing on operational challenges and where innovation could help. So we think about our projects, we think about the challenges that they may have, and then we look for an innovation that maybe helps with that problem. Now I underlined could, because these things might help. This is an innovation area. We don't know for sure. So we don't oversell these technologies. We try and be transparent, what we do know, what we don't know, and what we intend to learn. So our operating model, really our team is split down the middle. We have what we call portfolio innovation directors. We are disease area focused. Myself was one, with 4 other colleagues. And we also have what we call innovation capability teams. Our innovation capability teams are split into 3. So we have a team looking at enrollment and recruitment, a team looking at representativeness, and also a team looking at a differentiated trial experience. So decentralized clinical trials, for example, falls into that bottom bucket. Together, we aim to scout, to match, and to learn from the opportunities that we have. So my role as a portfolio innovation director is to look at the projects that we have coming down the pipeline very early, start to think about what operational challenges we might have, think about the areas that we might need to mitigate, and think about the technologies that we already are aware of that may solve those problems. Our capabilities teams help us in that endeavor. They help search or do landscape assessments on what technologies exist, and then we match those. So we don't use the technology to drive finding a trial to pilot these things. We find a challenge that we want to help resolve with a technology. So how do we work, and why has this changed? And I think Christina just touched on this point in her presentation. We used to start in the middle, which is after we get a final protocol synopsis. And as Joachim mentioned this morning, if you add a technology to an existing protocol, it's probably not going to make life easier. In our new model, we're much more involved at the very early planning stages. So when a new project is on the horizon, we get involved. We start doing our systematic assessments. We look at the diseases. We look at the patient insights that we might have. If we don't have them, we go out and find them. We talk to patients about the diseases. We think about the challenges that we might have, and then we validate them with our teams internally. So by starting early, it means we can have much more impact on maybe protocol design. We can think about the challenges that will most likely have the biggest impact on the trials, and then we can search for solutions that maybe will help mitigate or prevent them. Within our team, we're also now embedded into what we call our global clinical operations sub-teams. So as a portfolio innovation director, I work with this group of people in the yellow, and we work together to define a strategy. That strategy is defined at a project level. So we don't just work on a trial, we work before we get the first trial. And our strategy is defined to hopefully apply to all the trials that come within a project. So if we take a multiple sclerosis project, for example, we might have 3 or 4 trials. We define a project, think about the challenges that would impact all of those trials, and then come up with a strategy that we could apply across the board. So by being involved earlier, we can think much more around strategic planning, about vendor partnerships. We can have efficiencies around the technologies because we use them across multiple trials. On the right-hand side there, the clinical trial team. This is where our innovation capability teams support us. We don't just find the technologies and throw them over the fence. We help with rolling them out into our clinical trials. The things that we do are novel. If we already knew how to operate, if we already had processes behind them, we wouldn't consider them innovation. So our teams all work together with the clinical trial team to help look at the best way of implementing, the best way of rolling these things out, and then also support them through recruitment, and if needed, all the way through to the end of the trials. So the main part of my presentation is really focused on scalability and sustainability. I think we've all experienced that innovation is often a very trendy topic. We always jump on buzzwords such as AI. But we don't want this proliferation of trying things once and then trying them again and again and again. We want solutions that we can show the value, we can implement them time and time again, and we can make them become standard practice. So we have a structured approach to how we innovate. I'm sure the middle diagram is very familiar to you. As a portfolio innovation director, as I said, I get involved very early at the initiation stage. Think about the needs of the trials and our projects, start to evaluate the potential vendors, and then we go through piloting. Piloting is not always a good word. We have to do something for the first time at some point. So it's easier to call it a pilot, because then we can help with kind of hypercare and supporting teams more. In the center there, I mentioned the innovation capability teams. I mentioned the portfolio innovation directors. We also closely partner with our vendor management team. We don't do this alone, but the purpose of that diagram is to show that as we go from the initiation stage to full implementation, the processes behind what we do become normal practice. The goal is to show the value, show how the tactics that we implement help with the clinical trials that we run, and then they become normal practice. If they don't show value, then we stop them. So we're not just about innovating for the sake of innovating. We're not just trying to throw technologies at trials. We're trying to show where it adds value, and where it doesn't, then we kill it early. So if we think about Parkinson's disease as an example, it's a very highly competitive landscape. There's many PD trials at the moment. The the Parkinson's disease community are faced with very severe, often, mobility challenges, which increase just as disease does, or disease progresses. And I think even beyond Parkinson's, participating in a trial is a lot of effort. And for Parkinson's especially, it impacts the patient's family. So it's more than just a burden on the patient to participate. So my role, because I get involved early, is to think about how do we potentially mitigate or prevent some of those challenges. So the way I think about this for PD is I think about recruitment, trial flexibility, and convenience. I think about, could we use social media campaigns in certain countries to maybe help identify patients, either target the patient themselves, potentially their caregivers, their families. Nadir talked about patient matching earlier. Can we use databases that exist to find patients that maybe aren't already at the trial sites that we're partnering with? And can we use site networks? Sites often partner with several networks around their locality. Could we work with one site that maybe can connect to several others? We think about flexibility. DCTs have been a hot topic for many years now. We don't want patients always traveling to site, but at the end of the day, we want to make trials flexible. So can we design protocols where home nursing is an option? We can use telemedicine and the shipments to the patient's home if the patient desires. Patients often live in the cities where the hospitals are located, so they may prefer to go into site. But for those that don't, could we think about doing some home visits, but allowing that flexibility within the protocol? So because we're involved earlier, we can make those suggestions to the teams before they even start designing their protocols. And then if we think about convenience, I'm sure we all use now prepayment cards, transportation services. But there's also things out there that maybe might add value that aren't necessarily a technology. So could we even target sites that have out-of-office hours? Many patients work still, especially in early PD, so maybe they would prefer to go to their site at the end of the day. So we don't always have to look at the most innovative toys on the market. So coincidentally, Nadir, patient matching was one I did want to quickly mention. Just think about how we take our structured approach to innovation. So patient matching is especially kind of useful in oncology. We seem to be seeing a lot of vendors out there that have services supporting oncology trials. The way we look at this, we have trials that need help with recruitment. There are many oncology trials out there. We talked about there's less and less patients. So how do we find the patients that aren't at the sites that we typically partner with? So can we use the patient matching services to help identify patients? So we have a need. Our need is then followed by the evaluations to assess what does that vendor landscape look like. What vendors are out there? What experience do they have? Have they shown value elsewhere? So then we try these, partnering with the vendors through various trials. It may just be in oncology, but we may also think about other disease areas. We don't do this once. We might do this several times on several different trials to think about, is there value in all disease areas, or are there a few that really we can show the value? And as we iterate, you see that we go through this, the center diagram. We move from it being an innovation to becoming a normal process. So if we can show the value, then we move to full implementation, we define the SOPs, and then we hand things over to our vendor management team and our clinical trial teams for everything to become normal practice. If we show that there is no value, or we haven't been able to demonstrate a good return on investment, then we just don't continue with it. So measuring success is a big thing. I think historically we've talked about innovation. We talked about, will it add value? And often once we've finished with a project, we look back and say, well, did it do what we said it should do? But we often looked retrospectively. We didn't think about what does good look like from the outset. So we have a framework which we lovingly call Marco's metrics, because they were created by our colleague Marco. And it's not just looking at the impact kind of from one lens. We think about it from three lenses. So what was the adoption of the technology? What was the effectiveness, and what was the impact? So often technologies can only be implemented in certain countries, or initially we often target one or two countries to begin with. So we think about, for the sites and patients that were offered the solution, what proportion agreed to kind of take on that opportunity. We then think about the effectiveness. So how do the sites and patients that are using these tactics compare to those that didn't? So then we have some kind of tangible metrics to show, Where we didn't do the innovation, it may have had incremental benefit compared to those that did. And then we think about the impact overall. So was there demonstrable benefit compared to either industry benchmarks or kind of external benchmarks? So the three of these things together is how we judge the value and the success. If we looked at any of these individually, I don't think it would really tell us, did it do what we thought it would do? So, in summary, I think our group has been operating now for 18 months. I think with innovation, everything always takes longer than we anticipate. If we think about rolling out new tactics on trials, it's a 2 or 3 year kind of job. And if we want to do that 2 or 3 times to show value, then this is going to be a lengthy process. But we've already made good strides in the 18 months that we've been operating. The decisions that we make now are driven by business needs. I think we have over 30 active projects, and we probably support well over 60 to 100 where there's some kind of innovation being applied. All of those tactics that we apply are being measured. They all have a defined set of metrics behind them to demonstrate what does good look like. We continually focus on implementing on value-added solutions, but we get involved early. And I think that's one of the most fundamental changes, is that we get involved as projects start, not as clinical trial protocols are finalized. Our portfolio innovation directors match to projects and studies, as I mentioned, and we think about the technologies that we already have available, but our innovation capabilities team continually look to see what's out there to try and fulfill gaps that perhaps today we haven't identified. And then we scale innovations through our capability teams and our vendor management. So you saw on the graph, we start by the early phase, we define what does good look like, we iterate, we try again, we show the value, or we don't continue. And then we proactively identify opportunities, and we have the visibility on the innovation pipeline. So historically, because different groups were doing different things, we wouldn't actually know kind of across the company who's doing what where. Now we have a catalogue of all the trials and the projects that are in flight, all of the tactics that we have, how we're going to measure them, and we can see across the entire portfolio which tactics are being used where. So I think I actually have a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That was perfect in time. Must be the framework style. We have time for indeed a couple of questions.
Yeah, hi, Scott. Thank you for that. I have one question. I mean, you mentioned the fact that you need to have a couple of iterations so that you can test it out and have a better understanding of the impact. How do you manage the challenges of getting, qualifications, contracting, all that latency that consumes a huge amount of time?
So because we get involved so early, it's often 9, 12 months in advance of the first trial expecting to start. So if we do our assessments much, much earlier, we think about the disease, not just the trial. We can identify the tactics that we think will have most value. Often we might identify several, but we focus on the ones with most value. We then partner with our innovation capability teams to find a solution that would help. If it's a new vendor, then that's when the qualification starts. It's never a quick process. The other challenge, I think, with qualification of novel vendors is they're often very small. They've never been through the process before. All of pharma ask all of the same questions, and we create a lot of work and burden for these vendors. So we have to try and find vendors that we think will be able to cope or manage with the trials. But yeah, it's definitely a 6 to 9 month process. But if we know early, we have more time. But because we're involved early, we get it in our budget. That's the most important thing. It's always been a challenge. Thanks.
One more question?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just wanted to ask in regards to the ways you can capture the feedback and input from the sites in regards to the adoption of the tactics. If you can please share with us. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I give you one example of a recent trial of mine where we're trying a new tactic. We actually presented it at an investigator meeting. We walked them through step by step what the process was, why we think it will add value, why we think it will be beneficial to the sites, and then we asked the sites, do you think this is a good tactic? Would you be willing to take on and try this? I think it was 79% of the sites that responded said yes. So it's looking promising. The other thing we do with the innovation capability teams that we partner with, they will try and get site feedback. So depending on the technology, we might want to go to 3 or 4 sites and ask them for their input. We could also go to key opinion leaders. We haven't done that yet, but I think it's something that we could also do.
Exactly, and it's really important to get this feedback as early as possible. That's the point.
Yeah, no, it's a good. I should have reiterated it more when we talked about the challenges. I think the site perspective is probably the biggest challenge that we have. I think we know patients want these things. We get the patient feedback. I think we've dealt with the regulatory side of things. The sites to me is the kind of the missing piece at the moment. If we can onboard sites, get the buy-in, then I think we'll be more successful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.